Okay, happy Tuesday. It's week 11, session 2, and we're back together for our work on rhetorical speeches. So, good morning, Year 9. Lovely to have you with us. Okay, so we have been looking at different structures, different strategies of support, knowing that our outcome is going to be a written speech that follows this structure on a topic of your choice. Now, through the previous weeks, we have built up character setting and rising action paragraphs. And this week we will be looking at doing the climax, creating a compelling emotional point that appeals to the pathos, the emotions of the audience, a falling action section where we shift the tone to something more positive and hopeful with the focus on what can be achieved if we change, and the ending where we give our audience a final thing to do, a final moment of action. In other words, if we've got them feeling stuff, if we've got them thinking stuff, you then want to direct that emotion and that thinking into a practical action. So a speech always needs to end with something that we want the audience to do. Okay, now I know that when we've looked in previous lessons, you've built your paragraphs, but we've just flipped that little bit at the beginning of this week by me showing you a complete speech that goes through each of these sentences and these structures, and that will then inform the writing that you come on to do tomorrow. Now, again, we've seen other speeches from real examples. We've seen the example from Animal Farm. We've seen the example from Prince William. So if you actually were looking at the story that your notes and our lessons tell us, we've interleaved, we've moved across from examples of what other writers have done or speech writers have done into what we're doing. So there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. There's always going to be writers that do things slightly differently. But for us, we're going to stay focused on this structure. That's going to be a mark of our success. That if we can create a speech that clearly has these sections in it, then we're on to a winner. But we also want a speech that illustrates those features of high style using rhetorical devices. So that's again why I'm showing you a speech I've written so that it illustrates, again, the application of those rhetorical figures. So let's have a look at my climax section. So a quick reminder, climax means a compelling emotional point. So as you can see, this doesn't have to be big paragraphs. And we've already created the sustained opening, the bigger paragraphs in our opening section. So really your climax, your compelling emotional point, one way we make it compelling is we make it short. We make it really punchy. We make it 2 sentences. It goes right in, boom, with kind of a really emotional idea without too much actually expansion and amplification. So let's see what we are doing here. The cost to our bank balances might be low, but the cost to our conscience is high. And if we continue to be ignorantly blinded to the reality of child labour, then the cycle of poverty and exploitation will never be broken. It is time to open our eyes. So, my 3 questions for you. What rhetorical figure have I used to add impact to my message? A little clue to help you answer that one. Look at those 2 highlighted yellow words, high and low. What can we say about those words? Are they the same or are they opposites? Because if you know the answer to that, it's going to help you think about what rhetorical figure I might be using here. Okay. Number 2, is the second sentence, and if we continue to be ignorantly blind to the reality of child labour, is that an amplification, an explanation, or effect sentence? So when we were learning last week about growing sentences from 1 to 4, we said that there's the explanation sentence, the amplification and definition, or the effect sentence. So which one is working here? Okay, and 3, which extended metaphor have I used? Which words are part of the semantic field of that metaphor? We also looked at high style, features of high style being the use of extended metaphors and allusions in our earlier lessons, okay? And we did some brilliant work creating extended metaphors. So I've just said here, which extended metaphor have I used? Can you spot it? So press pause. Okay, give yourself time just to answer those 3 questions, but there could be quite short answers, but just give your time to think through what those answers are. And it's by magic here. We can look at the answers together. Brilliant. So because high and low are opposites, that's our antithesis, where writers will use opposites within a sentence. Yep. For impact, we've used anecdote now in the beginning of my speech where I was telling a personal story. Now we've used antithesis. So we are creating really that high to middle style. We've got lots of rhetorical figures, sometimes blended with colloquial and everyday language. Okay, so it's an effect sentence for number 2. Now, what it is not, it's not amplification and definition because I've not defined anything. It's not the explanation sentence because I've not used which one, because brilliant. But if you see, I've got that if-then structure. If we continue to be ignorantly blinded, then the cycle of poverty will never be broken. So it's an effect sentence. Okay, brilliant. Now, which extended metaphor have I used? Well, I was using the metaphor of being blinded. I tied it in with the semantic field, so other words linked to that. If you remember last week, we came up with our keyword and then created a bank of words to go with it. That's all we mean by semantic field, a bank of words that back up that metaphor. So I've got blinded, ignorant, and then open our eyes. Now, you could argue that that's another example of antithesis, blinded to open your eyes. Those are opposites, but brilliant. So give yourself a tick if you're all right. If you've got any of those wrong, just pause and think about, based on my explanation now, why I'm right and your answer was wrong. Okay, so now we're going to look at a falling action section. Now, this is the good bit. This is the bit of the speech where we're looking to shift the tone to hopeful. We've given them lots of real evidence maybe around our topic, why it's so bad. It's damaging the environment. It's damaging children's lives. We've done the negatives. Okay, now, though, we want to lift their mood, and we want to do that so they actually feel they can achieve something. If all you do is make people feel that there is nothing they can do, that this terrible thing is happening and we're powerless, then you wouldn't be really persuading them in the right way. So we're going to see what I do for the falling action section. Okay, we're going to be thinking about shift from positive to hopeful and what can be achieved if we change. But there are things we can do to change children's futures and allow them to be the lucky ones too. Now, remember, when we choose our topic sentences, sometimes it's good just to be really obvious what we're doing. So if you were writing a paragraph for your falling action section, you could say, but there are things we can do to change plastic pollution, but there are things we can do to change the way women are paid in sport. So never be afraid to be really clear at the beginning of a section and making it really clear and signaling to the reader what you're doing. Okay? And allow them to be the lucky ones too. The Fair Wear Foundation has a list of over 120 brands that have signed up to its code of labour practices, which do not allow for the use of child labour. Accredited brands must ensure with regular audits that all of these supplies in the cut, make, trim stage of production meet these standards, meaning it goes beyond most companies' in-house policies. Choosing to buy products from these brands will mean that you are not supporting the exploitation of children. Guys, so here you can see I've done research into the good side of this topic. So at the early part of my speech, 168 million children being exploited. I'm looking at what it meant to be exploited, researching around UNICEF, what child exploitation looked like, creating my anecdote about Alejandra. So I've done lots of research that I'm drawing upon at this stage in my whole speech. But I've also researched some positives. So it might be that part of what you have to do later today is think, well, actually, miss, I researched lots of negatives about plastic pollution, but I've got no positives. So you might be redirected in a minute to make sure you've got the content, the research, the ideas that will enable you to do the falling action section, the positive section. Okay, and I'll make that clear again in a minute. So you can also write letters to the heads of countries that permit any form of child slavery, forced labour, and ask them to strengthen and enforce their laws and to increase educational opportunities for children and humane, sustainable business opportunities for adults. So can you see both of those paragraphs are explaining what my audience can do? They're positive actions they can take. They're actions that are designed to create change around this topic. Stopping such insidious practices might seem like a Sisyphean task, but there are choices that all of us can make to improve conditions for children, to reduce our contribution to child labour, and to facilitate an end to the oppression and exploitation of children. Okay, guys, so here are your questions. Number one, which word links back to the very opening of my speech? Now, I know in my head, because I'm following my structure, I am moving towards the end, and sometimes we start to signal a link back to the beginning. That just creates cohesion. It reminds our audience where we started. So can you see the words that I've used that link back to the beginning of my speech? Which words are creating a more optimistic, positive tone? Which facts and research have I used to still appeal to their logos? Okay, to still appeal to their sense of reasoning? What positive actions or things can they do to make a difference? So for number 4, maybe just list 1 or 2. And what do I mean by that final phrase, Sisyphean task or Sisyphean task? Okay, so just press pause work through those questions, and I'll see you for the answers in a minute. Okay, are we ready? As if by magic? Is it going to happen? There we go. So, which word's linking back to the opening of the speech? Lucky. I talked, didn't I, at the beginning that I'm lucky. I'm a lucky one. I've had education. I've been, I might have thought school was boring, but actually I haven't suffered in the way Alejandro did or any of these children. So I've got that link back to lucky. Now, again, these positive words clearly make it linked to the structure of the falling actions structural point that I'm showing a positive change. And I've used the words change and future. But there are things we can do to change children's futures. Okay, so I'm starting to set that positive tone. So which facts or research have I used? Well, I make quite a long explanation, amplification here about this company, Fairwear, or foundation, sorry, and Fairwear is a foundation that lists brands that are ethical. In other words, brands that you can shop at confidently, knowing they haven't done anything or have any involvement with child exploitation, that they have good practices. So you can see actually that whole second paragraph is based on that research. So if you were doing plastic pollution, your paragraph here might be all about something you've researched that's making a positive impact on plastic pollution. Okay, you can write letters. So I've also given them, okay, something else that we can do. So for number 4, they can buy products from other companies. They can choose to buy products. They can write letters. You might have chosen that one. It says here as well that we can increase, that we can write to countries. Okay, so anything around that, buying products, writing to countries, that's brilliant. That will show that you've spotted the positive actions we can do to make a difference. Now, number 5, what do I mean by the phrase Sisyphean task? Something that is impossible to complete. Brilliant. So that's my allusion. Now, when you're deciding whether to use Sisyphean task or Herculean effort, you could argue that Herculean effort, if this is the positive section, might have worked better there. So that might be something, if I was redrafting this, I might improve. Okay. So now what's our final thing that we want the audience to do? Okay, so we're going to look at the ending of our speech. We all have a moral duty to educate ourselves about the horrors faced by some of the poorest and most vulnerable children across the world. So guys, I've got that direct link again back to the beginning of my speech. I'm creating a lovely cyclical, cohesive structure to my speech. The end is like the start, that use of the phrase moral duty. Okay, I'm using some really emotive vocabulary, vulnerable, poorest, and horrors there to create that link to pathos, to how our audience are feeling. We all have a moral duty to reject fashion that is tainted by the exploitation of children. We all have a moral duty to stand against child labour so that all children can be the lucky ones. Now, again, there's my direct link back to that idea of being lucky. Now, before I direct you to my questions, just some things. So the ending of your speech, when you come to write it, again, doesn't have to be really long. Our falling action section, again, was sustained. You could see there was some quite, those 1 to 5, growing one sentence into 5 sentences working in that middle section, that falling action section. But at this end, we can all actually use this. We can all potentially end our speeches, whatever the topic is, with this little structure that I've got here. We all have a moral duty to educate ourselves about the horrors of plastic pollution and the devastation that is being wrought to our most precious oceans. We all have a moral duty to reject plastic that is not being disposed of appropriately and safely. We all have a moral duty to stand against plastic pollution so that our oceans can be regenerated, so that our oceans can be saved. So when it actually comes to looking at this speech, there's lots here that you can use again when you come to your own writing. But let's look at these questions. What final thing do I want my audience to do? How have I linked the last sentence of my speech to the first sentence of my speech? Is the repetition of the opening phrase, we all have, an example of the rhetorical device of litotes, anaphora, or hyperporia? So what device am I using when I keep saying we all have a moral duty? And is there anything you would like to change, edit, or improve in my speech if you're looking with a critical eye? So just pause again and write your answers to those questions.